go ahead and introduce our speaker for today's presentation. We are joined by anti-counterfeiting expert Ron Guido. Ron is president of Lifecare Services, LLC, a consulting firm in the healthcare industry specializing in marketing, business development, brand protection, and supply chain management. Ron has 36 years experience with Johnson & Johnson. He has held executive-level positions in the areas of operations, sales, product, global marketing, new business development, information technology, and general management. His most recent role was Vice President, Global Brand Protection and Supply Chain Integrity, where his group was responsible for anti-counterfeiting programs and policies. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn things over to Ron to get us started.
Well, thank you very much, and welcome, everyone. We're going to talk about this. My favorite subject these days is the concept of brand protection. And it's a brand new discipline in your organization, and we'll talk about the reasons why it's important and what are the components of a successful brand protection program. We've labeled those the 12 best practices. After that, we'll summarize this discussion and leave it open for questions and answers. So first, let's explore what do we mean by brand protection and why is it important to your organization. Well, it is a relatively new business discipline, and unfortunately it's been necessitated by the growth of counterfeit products, gray market diversion, theft, and fraud. And like any other business, we look at it on a global level because commerce these days spans all industry sectors on a global basis. And we're trying to establish the same principles of engagement, the background and skills of the individuals in the brand protection organization and where it fits into the company. Just like we look at finance or marketing or supply chain management, well, brand protection has to be embedded into that same fabric of the organizational structure. And when successful, it'll set this strategic direction for anti-counterfeiting measures. We'll talk about some of the measures and technologies that come to bear on this problem, the operational practices and policies, and also your public face, both to your customers and to any of the regulators or law enforcement agencies that you're working with to protect your brands. It also focuses on securing the supply of products, which obviously helps protect any users of your product, customers, or patients if you're in the healthcare space, and uphold the reputation of your brands and of your company in general. Ultimately, there's a financial impact here because if your brands are healthy, your bottom line is going to be healthy as well. And then like any other discipline in your company, there's performance measurement that's important to brand protection, both strategically and tactically, and we'll get into how you monitor that as you implement these supply chain best practices. So with that as a backdrop, let's begin. The first thing, as no surprise, would be corporate culture. From the most senior to the most junior member of the organization, every employee, associate, or partner serving the company and all of your external stakeholders must embrace a no-tolerance policy when it comes to brand abuse. This includes counterfeits, diversion, or pilferage and theft of your products. By adopting this enterprise-wide culture of investigating all incidents, investing in brand-protecting technologies, and evolving from feeling like a victim where you're treating incidents as they come up to moving upstream to preventive measures, the risk of all supply chain vulnerabilities is greatly reduced. Once you have the corporate culture established, we move on to incident management. And this is very basic. This is the fundamentals of a good program, is to really understand the issues that your company and your brands are facing. But in order to evolve from a tactical response culture to one of the prevention, the organization must report each detail of every incident so that a catalog of incidents, a database of incidents, is maintained on an ongoing basis. This will give you the ability to look at trend analysis, big data analytics, and pattern recognition. So as individual incidents are grouped by common elements, for instance, what's common would be channels of trade that have similarities. Of course, your product codes. Some codes may be violated more than others. Pricing tiers. You might see that your products are being sold either fake ones or diverted goods are being sold at different price points. Also, the trade routes that are being followed. If you can catalog all this information, then the brand protection specialist can determine whether the factors present will lead to identifying the source of the fake or diverted goods and lead to appropriate legal and business actions that you can take. So you really need to know what you're up against by cataloging each incident and looking for patterns. Now, the data capture should include anything that you know about that incident, the dates, the names of all persons, in fact, all proper names that come up with that incident, because over time you may see a recurrence of the names, places, and the people and places that are perpetrating these events, and details about the scope and consequences of the incident and the status. Is it an open case? It was one that was triaged and corrected. So keeping all these records very, very important, and that's why it's up front here as number 2 of the best practices for a brand protection program. Now, as we move on to communication and training, and this is primarily internal, but it extends out to all of your stakeholders, your suppliers, your distributors, and contracted solution providers in any way. But, you know, similar to the adage that quality in an organization is the responsibility of everyone, every employee, so too the knowledge and awareness of brand protection methods and the risks and vulnerabilities of counterfeiters and diverters must be shared by all employees and all external stakeholders. So effective programs like new employee training, you come on board, immediately you're given as part of your orientation package information about the commitment to brand protection and the no tolerance for brand abuse. Reporting and escalating incidents. No matter where you are in the world, if you're an employee or an associate of that organization, know how to report the incident and get it in real time to the authorities so they can catalog it and triage it. Determine the cost-value proposition of anti-counterfeiting technologies and best practices, because let's face it, there's a cost associated with layering in some added protection to your products, and knowing how to do that and how to look at a cost-benefit is certainly worthwhile. But all of this should be ingrained into the workforce as a way to unify the culture around this prevention, the prevention mode. So training and awareness sessions should be refreshed annually at a minimum. And whenever there's something new to share with the organization, you know, you may send out a newsletter or an update of some kind. The content of that training should include an overview of counterfeiting and the ways and means of the counterfeiters and the gray market diverters, including any incidents of theft and what factors led to a theft or a pilferage action. And what to do. You know, the old say something, see something, say something, do something, that applies here as well. When you're suspicious of an illegal activity, report that incident, even if it turns out to be false. And then you have legal and ethical procedures must be covered in your training as well. And have the frequently asked questions and where to go for additional information. Again, this is all part of the fabric of general understanding throughout the organization. And in addition to periodic communications on brand protection, circulate industry articles about counterfeits, you know, so that people are sensitized to how other brands and other industry sectors have also being affected by this, and more importantly, how do you counter the risk and put in countermeasures? So that's communication and training. As we move on to number 4, market surveillance, it's really about auditing the marketplace. Since the counterfeits and the unauthorized trade by design are usually hidden from those engaged in the legitimate acts of commerce, a prudent practice is to audit the marketplace for evidence of new entities handling your product or, say, unfamiliar sellers of your goods, either on the Internet or through unauthorized brokers and retailers. So if you know your patterns because you know your business, you have that knowledge of commercial activity, look for aberrations or anomalies in that. Search the Internet using professional Internet surveillance vendors, you know, Monitor obviously being a specialist in this area, to look for misrepresentations of your product, and uncover chatter, so to speak, about quality issues or supply issues. So if there's a pattern of reports on the internet that your product's not performing well, it could very well be that some of the users have been using counterfeit goods. It's important to see that and look at all this chatter through the lens of brand protection, not just from, well, we must have had a quality defect in our product. No, it could be that there's a pattern to the chatter and it may be in an area where there's illicit trade taking place. It's also advisable now to periodically purchase your product from random sources. And while you might say that's like looking for a needle in a haystack, it is important to check the authenticity of the product, look at the packaging and any supporting documentation that's provided with that trade. You can learn a lot by random purchases of your product, particularly in those channels of trade that fall below the radar screen. That's market surveillance. Let's move on to number 5, commercial insights. Now, again, as we mentioned before, the best information available to brand owners in their efforts to protect the supply chains is generated from the legitimate trading practices. Look at your history. Insights into potential breaches to the supply chain integrity can be attained by mining information, by harnessing big data. So what are those data points? You know, your sales history. If you see any new ship-to locations, look at the order size. Is that changing over time? And if you look at these again, thinking that maybe there's some aberration in the pattern, you can extract those unusual trading patterns and get some and start to explain some of the unknown in the supply and demand pattern. So these can be extracted from transaction history, can help you identify violations in what we call the 3 primary areas of risk. That would be the channel of trade, the brand or product line itself, or time spans, right? So there may be some seasonality to these aberrations, and if you can't explain them by the nature of your product or by, you know, a contract being gained or lost, so whatever history, transactional history you have by channel of trade, by product line, or even country of sale, this would be a good way to analyze and see where those differences are. Commercial insights. Number 6 is cybersecurity. Now, again, the experts here are Mark Monitor. It's a matter of looking at your brands and protecting them against fraudsters who, as we all know, are incredibly resilient, incredibly creative in conducting phishing and malware attacks across multiple digital channels. Your intent is not only to protect the brands, but also your employees, your customers, your prospects from any of these fraudulent schemes. And I would strongly recommend you contact your Mark Monitor representative to better understand what tools and capabilities they have that might be applicable to your business. Cybersecurity, very much an important part of protecting your domains, your trademarks, all of your intellectual property, and of course your electronic communications. Number 7 is distributor compliance, and this really comes down to your trusted distributors. Well, we're going to add something to that. We're going to call it trust with verification. They really recommend, this practice suggests a paradigm shift in the contract terms with your distributors, your brokers, and think of all the people who might be handling your product between the time that you may have produced it to the point of use. You know, there are a lot of third-party logistics companies that enter into it, importers, exporters, repackagers, and so forth. And historically, we've contracted trading partners to conduct our business on a trust basis. And when we financially audit them, they performed ostensibly to look at inventory reconciliation or maybe to assess legal or ethical compliance matters. But under a brand protection-driven arrangement, the key is, as I mentioned, is trust with verification. And what it recommends is building language into your distribution agreements which clearly state that supply partners are not permitted to purchase your product from any other entity except directly from you, the manufacturer. Excuse me. This condition along with careful audit and examination of the monthly shipments to them, what we call sell-in information, and in their sell-out information on who they ship to the next node in the supply chain. It sends a strong message to your distributors about your focus on supply integrity and, of course, the financial integrity that follows. So these are undeniable accountabilities for all trading partners today, particularly when you're crossing borders and you lose visibility and control of those goods. They have your brand name on it, but you may not have chain of custody anymore. It's very important that you're relying on this trust and verification downstream. And we'll talk about product protection as well and how you can put some technologies on the package and on the product itself to help increase that visibility. But if distributors are contracted to also manage reverse logistics like return goods, the same accountability for inventory accuracy and financial credits are expected. So distributor, supplier compliance, returns goods compliance, all this has to be documented in distributor agreements to impress upon them the high value that you place on protecting your brands. Best practice number 8 is theft and diversion protection. Now, gray market diversion is defined, and sometimes it's called pricing arbitrage or parallel trade, but it's defined as the unauthorized removal of your genuine product from the legitimate supply chain, and more broadly includes diverted goods from, say, one channel of trade to a more profitable channel. So the diverters don't really have harm in mind when they're taking your product out of the normal supply chain. It's a profit motive. So they want to buy your product at a low price or not buy it at all, just take it and resell it into another channel, and that upcharge becomes their profit. So inventory theft, including theft of goods stored or in transit, is considered a form of diversion and must be addressed just as a serious breach of supply chain integrity is. So it's all taking your goods out of the normal legitimate supply chain, may be subjected to different temperature controls, maybe different handling, relabeling, repackaging, instructions for use or loss. There are a lot of bad things that can happen to genuine product when it's diverted out of its normal channels. Counterfeiters then seek opportunities to insert their goods, their fakes, into the supply chain where diverted or stolen goods are being traded. It's a good camouflage for them. So protective measures against theft and diversion include even facility security. So 24-hour surveillance cameras and smart locks in and around all facilities are recommended. Transportation security measures might include tandem driver teams so that you never leave the truck unguarded with 2 drivers. If you're at a rest stop, keep someone at the truck at all times. Seals on trailer doors and all kinds of new technologies for electronic seals and making it very difficult for the trailer doors to be open. Covert GPS devices placed on board the trucks in the cab, but also in the parcels on the pallets. And what we're doing is we want to redefine even the truck schedules and the routes to minimize the number of stops and to make sure that when a truck leaves the depot that it can arrive at its next stop without waiting for the schedule of hours to change. In other words, you want to make sure that that destination is open and you can drive right in rather than leave the truck outside the gates of its destination. Other anti-diversion techniques include track and trace technologies, and serialization identifiers, which could be added to the product, and packaging to make sure that if product is diverted, you can find it through electronic means, which sets us up for number 9, which is really looking more broadly at authentication and tracking products. So among the most effective anti-counterfeiting practices would be the application and management of product protection technologies. They really are categorized in one of 2 areas. The first are those that provide an instantaneous pass-fail on the authentication of the product or the package. So it's a spot authentication. where the product is interrogated or the packaging is interrogated with a device, a scanner perhaps, anywhere in the supply chain. And then there are those that track the movement of the product. And those might be more reliable if you can see where the product is and when it's located someplace that it's not supposed to be, or if it falls off the grid, you know at that point in time and place that something bad happened to the product. Authentication features can be overt. In other words, just have to look on the label and you can find them if you know what you're looking for. They can be hidden in the inks on the label, and you might need a special scanner to identify where they are. And they can even be forensic in nature, which means that you can get a legal assessment of whether or not that truly is your package or your product through the forensic nature. Sometimes there are chemical markers on the product or in the package that can be held up in a court of law if you want to prove that that product is fake or it's genuine. And it also includes one of the things that are becoming very, very common. You may have seen these in your local retail stores, tamper-evident seals. So a tamper-evident seal or a label is when when the package is opened, it leaves behind evidence that the product has been opened and difficult to reseal or to change or to rip the label off, because they'll leave behind a marker saying, hey, there used to be a label here. There are also special tag-ins and all sorts of visual effects that are placed in the inks, holograms you may have heard of, micro markings, and various other products. For the product movement, the ideal product protection strategy will have some sort of 2D barcode, some matrix or encrypted serial number that's readable in the field with a secure application and some sort of mobile device. All codes are then stored in a secure database, which houses the unit's, we call it the pedigree, the track and trace history of that product. So every time you interrogate a product along the way, you provide a real-time record of the product's authenticity and its chain of custody. So what we recommend is having multi-layered brand protection technologies, meaning product protection strategies would also include some combination of authentication technologies and tracking the movement of the product using a track and trace. It's much more difficult than to circumvent these if you're a counterfeiter. That's product protection number 9. Number 10, product returns. So in industries where liberal product returns prevail, so we have policies that are very liberal, will take back most anything, and then many industries are like that now, free returns and so on. Illicit traders then use that channel to unload their fakes or their diverted product back for financial credit. So you can imagine the embarrassment if your liberal returns policy accepts back a fake product, you inspect it, you put it back on the shelf, and you ship it out to the next buyer. So you're actually shipping fake goods of your own brand. So returns fraud can be avoided by implementing safeguards to the returns intake process. Such procedures would include avoiding the aggregation of returns by third parties. When you do that, in other words, a third party is contracted to amass all returns. This is often done in the case of a recall, and it's too much volume for you to handle internally. So you go to a third party who aggregates that information. Excuse me, that's the point. They aggregate the inventory. They don't necessarily keep the records on who returned what, so the proper documentation is missing. And you might scan labels for authenticity if you've marked those labels accordingly. But when practical, the outer packaging of return goods should be removed and the actual product should be examined, because we've seen evidence of fake goods and counterfeit packaging. We've seen genuine packaging that has fake product inside, so you really need to interrogate both the package and the product itself. And return goods history should also be checked for unusual patterns. If suddenly you have a bolus of returns that you weren't expecting, and it never happened before on that day, or if there's no explainable reason, you may want to look into the product more deeply. Product returns. Number 11 is product destruction. This is another very clever way for the bad guys to get a hold of your product. So a common practice of diverters is to acquire product that's been designated for destruction, your product designated for destruction, and redirect those goods back into the legitimate supply chain. And this can be done with or without them repackaging and relabeling your product. So often it happens with expired product or damaged goods that are claimed from third parties. These third parties are usually contractors that you say, okay, come back up your truck and we'll give you a truckload of damaged goods and we want you to bring them to the landfill or to have them incinerated. Well, we need to make sure that those contracted parties actually do bring those goods for destruction so that they're not reintroduced. The best practices is to have trusted, again, agreements with trusted third parties, and to have your employees actually witness, maybe even videotape the destruction and attest to that fact. It's not enough to just get the driver of the truck to sign for the inventory and never see it again. Number 12 is similar, and it's equipment disposition. Often with plant closings or discontinuations of product lines, it does attract counterfeiters looking for production capabilities and equipment to add to their capacity. Similar to the destruction of damaged goods or outdated product, company-managed equipment and even tooling and printing plates, as well as any other physical assets placed at contract manufacturers or contract packagers, should be inventoried and cataloged in a database that assigns risk to each piece of equipment. Why is this important? If you know that that product, if given to a counterfeiter, can simulate the production of your product, then that's a high-risk product and should not be sold, say, on an auction site and dispositioned accordingly. So assign a risk profile to each of your pieces of equipment, whether, again, they're at your facilities or a contracted facility, high, medium, low. And that reflects the likelihood that an item can be refurbished and used to make counterfeit goods. Retired equipment is then dispositioned based upon its respective risk assessment. If you have a high or medium risk piece of equipment, destroy it. If there's something that's a very low risk and it can be auctioned for resale, we'll continue to have that. Another part of the brand protection discipline is to actually review that equipment and sign off on, yes, it's okay to sell off this equipment to third parties, yet this set of equipment or tooling, let's destroy and forego any resale value of it. So that completes the 12 best practices. I know there's a lot there, and you can build towards them, but the most important thing starts with number one, and that's to establish this mindset that we have trust with verification. We know there are people that are out there trying to leverage our brand reputation for profit. Maybe they're trying to just get their hands on low-value versions of your product and reintroduce it into a higher price channel. When we summarize this, we say we really need to embrace the discipline of brand protection and focus on upstream and downstream supply chain integrity. Start with a company-wide no tolerance policy and get that commitment from all employees. Provide regular updates and training for them so they know what their role is in their respective jobs and responsibilities to this culture of supply integrity. Assess product risk and supply chain vulnerabilities by examining known incidents and patterns, but then also use your market intelligence and your history of trade to identify where there may be aberrations in those patterns and uncover possibilities of unauthorized trade. It's always a good idea to purchase your own product from various channels, inspect that product. Did you buy it from a place where it's supposed to be, or based upon the lot number or batch number, that product, the word product code should never be in that market, so you know that diversion was involved if it's genuine. Implement comprehensive set of preventive best practices. Do not adopt the mentality of we're a victim, somebody decided to counterfeit our brands, an innocent victim here. You really want to look at those incidents with the eye toward establishing preventive measures and make sure that all that that technology and the insights and the expertise is shared across the enterprise and out to external stakeholders. And lastly, like any other business discipline, measure results, catalog your incidents, look at patterns over time, and constantly look to mature your best practices at least annually to get better and better at them at each cycle. It's an exciting area, and like I said, it's just new, but you see more and more organizations are adopting brand protection policies, principles, and practices to guard their supply chain. So I thank you for your attention, and now I believe it's time for some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. We did have some questions come in. As a quick reminder, if you have any questions, just submit them via the Q&A tab on your screen. So we have some questions come in from chat. The first one is, which discipline or backgrounds are best suited for a transition into the role of a brand protection professional?
Oh, that's a great question because, like I said at the beginning, you really don't have a degree in this. There are supply chain professionals that evolve into a brand protection specialist. But the short answer is any discipline within the company can serve as a feeding organization into a brand protection discipline. In my experience, we've seen people who have knowledge of the supply chain. Maybe distributor relations is good. Engineers, they're always good to have in the brand protection organization to assess technologies and develop plans for implementation. Packaging people, legal, marketing folks. It really is, since it's a cross-functional, cross-enterprise discipline, building an organization that has diversity of backgrounds and skill sets is very important. And quality control, like I said, but it's not just a security background. I think the knee-jerk reactions say, well, bring people with a security background. I think the security professionals in your organization are very important to helping with the incident management part of this. But when it comes to business practices, you probably want people who have grown up in the disciplines of legitimate trade and now look at it through their lens on what could go wrong. And the other one that I think is very important, because we're dealing with big data, is to really get your IT department involved, people who understand internet technologies, mobile devices, and apps for authenticating product in the field, and looking at the aberrations in data over time.
Great. The next question is, are anti-counterfeiting efforts typically kept confidential from one company to another, or are their best practices shared among competitors?
So our brand protection practices shared across an industry or an industry sector, or they kept confidential? Well, I guess the answer is both. Reasons you don't want to share all of your knowledge about incidents and so forth because, again, you don't know how that information could be used by the bad elements in the marketplace to, circumvent your countermeasures. But having said that, there are certain industries where they continue to get plagued by supply chain risk. To share that information is very valuable because typically they're using the same customers, the same intermediaries, maybe the same sources of product, and it's always important and valuable to share best practices on what's working and what's not in a non-confidential way for the betterment of that industry. Because I've often said that when it comes to brand protection and to things like counterfeit that can harm people, there is no competitive advantage. Shame on any company that says our supply chain is more secure than our competitor. I think there are venues and ways in which you can share information without giving away secrets of the company, but sharing best practices and forming a coalition against the bad guys.
Okay, thank you. The next question, where should brand protection reside within the corporate structure?
Good question. I guess since we're talking primarily around supply chain integrity, both upstream from raw material supply all the way down to distributor management and end users, I would say that the most resources and the ability to apply technology to product and packaging would be somewhere in the supply chain. So I think generally marketing is broken down by brand or by business unit, where supply chain sometimes are cross-business unit and more global in nature. I would say a lot of the protective measures have to be implemented inside the supply chain. So I guess somewhere in the logistics side or the packaging and logistics and distribution end of the supply chain is probably the best. There's sort of a misnomer here. We call it brand protection, so immediately you would think, well, the brand teams. But the brand teams are really about generating orders and the revenue generation side of the house. I think this takes on a different view if we're looking at everything from security to legal actions to supply chain changes and protective technologies. It's probably best in a supply chain, but the more important thing is have a brand protection organization, and you may find that it's best suited in anywhere else in the company.
The next question, can you elaborate on which technologies are the most effective in preventing counterfeits?
I think that, you're not going to like this answer, but it does depend upon the situation. There are two extremes that don't work. The one would be the very obvious, marking on a product or a package. We used to put holograms on it thinking that the counterfeiters are not sophisticated enough to replicate a hologram. Therefore, if you put a hologram, your brands are, you're going to deter counterfeiters from attacking your brands. Well, that's all changed with the abilities of anybody to find, great printing equipment and tools. So I think on that end, the most obvious overt packaging technologies might be less effective than we thought they would be. But similarly, if the technology is so complex and so covert that your trusted inspectors, investigators can't find where that technology resides on the product or the package, and therefore they can't create this pass-fail assessment without, say, chemical analysis, then you've probably gone too far. I would say the best technologies are some combination of overt markings and covert markings in the package and track and trace technology. So you want both the authentication abilities of going in when you're looking for something and get a first determination, does it look like it may have been falsified? But the track and trace technologies will give you more insight on how the product got to the point where you're now where it's now suspicious and you're questioning why that product is there and whether or not it's authentic. So I think the combination of track and trace and point authentication are important in working in pairs. But the other part of it is don't be predictable. Continue to change your strategy over time and mix up your solution set so that you're not predictable to the counterfeiters. If they find the covert marking in one part of your label for one product, maybe they'll assume that's where you always put it. So continue to change out your technology sets over time.
Great. Thank you, Ron. That was a great presentation. We appreciate you sharing those best practices with our audience today. So I'd also like to thank everyone tuning in for your participation. Those were some great questions that came in. As a reminder, we'll be sending out a follow-up email with a link to the webinar's presentation slides and a recording within the next couple of days, so you can be on the lookout for that email. That concludes our webinar for today. Thanks again for tuning in, and have a great day.